Hi, beautiful people. Welcome to the Fort Salem Library, where we read you your fanfiction. So sit down or don't, relax or don't, and enjoy these stories in a way you have not before. We at Fort Salem Library do not own Motherland Fort Salem or any of the related characters. The Motherland Fort Salem series is created by Elliot Lawrence and owned by Freeform. This story is a work of fanfiction and is meant for entertainment only. We are not making any profit from these stories. All rights of the original Motherland Fort Salem story belong to Freeform. We also do not own Small or any of its original characters and storylines. We did, however, get permission from the author to read their story. This story was created and written by Gesshoo, and you can find the link in our show notes. This story is being read to you by Dani.
Small, Chapter 8. Sarah Alder didn't like to cheat, but she also wasn't opposed to cheating under the right circumstances. 15 minutes into this ridiculous situation, a situation which her tiny terror of a soulmate had demanded with an unholy screech to rival the Big Bang, and she was yet to complete her objective. In a grand total of 4 rooms, each only moderately sized, Tally had somehow managed to disappear entirely. Sarah was certain she'd already uncovered every nook and cranny of her office, she and Tally's bedroom, their bathroom, and the biddies' dorm, and yet here she was, still utterly Tallyless. Thus, Sarah believed she was now firmly within said right circumstances for cheating. She had only just circled back into her office and was about to tap into the soul bond in order to locate Tally when a knock sounded on the door. Sarah barely got a breath in before the door cracked open, and Rael Caller shoved her head inside. "Oh, yeah, she's here," she said, then tossed open the door like she was waltzing into her own dorm and entered with Abigail right on her heels. "Hey, Sarah, we came to see—" "Hush!" Sarah quickly commanded, her voice more a hiss than anything. "And close the door, quick!" To their credit, Bellwether and Collar morphed into military mode with impressive speed. Rael's spine stiffened like tense wire as she immediately lowered into a defensive stance, and Abigail all but slammed the office door closed as she half expected one of the spree to come barreling through with a balloon in hand. When she rolled back around, she, too, lowered into stance right at Rael's shoulder, perfectly alert. Her voice dropped to a razor-sharp whisper as her gaze darted all around the office, rapidly clocking each and every inch of the place. "What's happening?" Sarah couldn't even find the display amusing because she, too, was in full military mode at this point. "Hide and seek," she explained, tone entirely too serious. Just a small, disembodied giggle, airy and quiet, emanated from one shadowy portion of the room. Instantly, Abigail broke stance. Her shoulders slumped and her expression quickly morphed from solemn soldier to annoyed older sister. In seconds, she was positively miffed. "Seriously?" the disembodied voice whispered, now from a different area of the room entirely. How Tally managed to move without alerting a single person in the room was utterly beyond Sarah. Yet she couldn't help feeling a twinge of pride. Impressive. Also, undeniably, a bit terrifying. Rael, still in defensive stance, couldn't swallow down her laugh. A ridiculous grin painted over her face as she looked back at Abigail. "Are you having flashbacks to the children's wing?" "Trauma flashbacks." "Oh, come on, Abs," Rael said with a chuckle. "She's 5. She's a nuisance. And you're a spoil sport," Rael countered, and Abigail's face was too soured to even allow her to argue. "Just get over yourself and play." "You don't play with demons, Ray. You exorcise them." Sarah snorted and whirled toward a tiny pattern of feet, only to find nothing and no one there. "I'll admit I am in agreement with Abigail at this point," she confessed. "I feel as if I've lost the entirety of my senses, or else I would surely have captured her by now. I was just about to resort to tapping into the soul bond before you both arrived. How long has she been hiding? Nearly 20 minutes now. Damn, seriously? She has access to 4 rooms, including the office, our private rooms, and the biddies' dorm, Sarah explained. And she is apparently a master of disguise. I had to have been staring right at her on at least a few occasions without ever actually locating her. And the biddies aren't helping? Rael asks. Where are they? Tally forbade them from assisting me and demanded they stay in their room, Sarah explained. They've sworn they aren't participating, but I'm certain at this point they must be aiding her. Rael cackled. All right, Tal, she cheered into the room. Making allies. Good strategy. Her only response was another wisp of a giggle that immediately trailed away in a disappearing echo. Sarah's feet were moving before the echo could dissipate entirely, sprinting towards the hidden passage that led to their bedroom, with Rael quick on her heels, and Abigail casually heading for the bar cart beside Sarah's desk. Their steps thundered as they sprinted into the corridor, and then a squeal rent the air. Tally's tiny steps quickened ahead of them, but Sarah saw only empty space. Do you see her? Rael called from behind Sarah. Negative. She sounds so close, though. The words triggered not only a thought, but a revelation, and Sarah quickly fired out a seed as they entered the bedroom. The empty space of the room shimmered like a heat rippling through the air, and a moment later, Tally's red hair and even redder face glittered into view. She stood just on the other side of she and Sarah's bed, pressed up against the wall with a tiny hand cupped over her mouth, barely hiding her wide grin and undoubtedly deep dimples. Oh, you little cheater! Rael said with a loud bark of a laugh, and Tally giggled wildly behind her hand. Rael bumped Sarah's arms with her own. Looks like you were right. The biddies were definitely helping. Yes, Sarah said with a fond shake of her head. A cloaking seed. Clever. And totally unfair. Indeed. Come here, you little trickster, Rael said and waved Tally over. Give me a hug. Tally squealed and raced around the bed. She leapt before she was even within a foot of proper range, and Rael barely just caught her. She scooped her up with a grunt and balanced her on her hip, cocked out to the side to support Tally's weight. Tally ringed her arms around Rael's neck and grinned wickedly up at Sarah. You found me, my Sarah! Sarah reached over to bop the tip of Tally's nose with her finger. Yes, and I would have found you sooner if you hadn't used your devilish charm to swindle the biddies into cloaking you. It's witches hide and seek! Tally exclaimed, and Rael snorted. Smart. She then looked to Sarah. Besides, weren't you just saying you were going to cheat by tapping into the soul bond? I. Way, get close, Tally said, cutting Sarah off. Rael frowned but squeezed Tally a bit closer to her chest. You okay, buddy? No way. Close to my Sarah. Oh, excuse me. Rael rolled her eyes as Sarah chuckled and teasingly poked her shoulder. She barely managed to step towards the woman before Tally was launching herself across the slightly smaller space between them. Aw, shit! Incoming! Rael stumbled forward a bit as Tally's weight pitched ahead before she could brace, but Sarah, thankfully, kept the girl from falling. With an oomph, she grabbed Tally mid-wild leap with one arm and caught Rael's shoulder to steady her with the other. Tally, she said on a sigh, I've told you, you mustn't do that. When you want to get down or have someone else hold you, ask or say so. I did! Tally cried in her own defense, even as her hand snuck under Sarah's loose hair and buried at the base of her head. Her fingertips scratched at Sarah's scalp as she leaned in and pressed her little forehead to Sarah's temple. I said get close. Yes, and then you tossed yourself like a frisbee before either of us were ready, Sarah gently reprimanded. She stroked her palm over the frizzy red ponytail Tally wore, then tapped one of the small dimples on the tip of her finger. You must try to be clear about what you want, and you must be patient in receiving. Otherwise, you could hurt yourself. Or someone else. My love, you could have strained Rael's poor back. Oh no, well, Tally said, an over-the-top pout now jutting her bottom lip forward. I'm okay, Tal, Rael said with a small smile. Sarah's right. You gotta be more patient, buddy. Tally jerked as she started to lean toward her sister, but ah, Sarah tutted. Tally, what did we just say? What did you learn? Tally quickly froze in place but held her ridiculous pout. Sarah wasn't certain it was entirely sincere, but goddess, it was cute. Um, she sucked her bottom lip in just enough to chew it for a moment, a gesture that sparked an odd and sudden bit of sorrow in Sarah's chest. It was just as her Tally, had always done. When she was thinking or nervous, studying or scheming, flirtatious, Sarah missed it, missed her, missed them. The pout returned in full force as Tally looked back at Sarah and quietly asked, My Sarah, I want to touch. Wait. Rael tucked her own lips inward to hold her soft laugh, as Sarah merely quirked one militantly plucked eyebrow at the small girl. Please? Tally added, unsure. Then, her chin dipped as she gave a serious little nod, certain she made the right choice. Please. With a gentle laugh, Sarah said, Well done. She stepped closer to Rael, who reached out a hand that Tally quickly latched onto and pulled to her cheek as she leaned towards Rael. Sarah moved with her, hardening her thighs to hold herself steady as Tally's weight shifted. She watched as Tally cupped Rael's hand around her own dimpled cheek. Hey, buddy, Rael said with a smile. I'm sorry, Way. I know you are, but thank you for telling me. Sarah could hear the honest affection in Rael's voice. She could see it in her expression, and the words she spoke had not only wisdom in them, but a patience she'd not known Rael Collar to have in many other regards. Like Anakostia, and like Sarah herself, she seemed to have a natural affinity for and connection with children. It was lovely to witness and to be able to share with her. Back hurt? No, I'm okay, Rael assured her. My back isn't hurt. Tally leaned a little harder into her palm. Mad at Tally? Rael smiled and bopped Tally's chin. Not a bit. She leaned a little closer and dropped her voice to a dramatic whisper. In fact, you're still my best buddy. Tally grinned and tried to hide her face in Rael's palm, squeezing her wrist tightly. Way. Just don't tell Agabel, yeah? She might be jealous. Uh-oh, Sarah thought, and no sooner had she thought it than Tally had perked up like a deer caught in headlights. Her puffy cheeks dusted pink and her eyes brightened. Aggie? With a heavy sigh positively riddled with the jealousy she had only just spoken of, Rael tilted her head towards the passage leading back to Sarah's office and said, Yeah, Aggie's your favorite. Come on. Aggie! Tally squealed, hard and high-pitched enough to make Sarah's eyes twitch. She dug her heels into Sarah's thighs and bounced wildly on her hip like Sarah was her own personal pony. And Tally was urgently trying to get her to quicken her canter. Let's go, Sarah! Rael scoffed and all but stomped down the passage ahead of them, and Sarah couldn't help herself from smiling as she followed. Rael, she called ahead, don't be jealous. I'm not. Mm-hmm. Oh, shut up, Rael said, sending an annoyed glance over her shoulder. You're her other favorite, so you don't get it. And stop laughing! I'm not laughing! Inside you are, Rael countered. Don't lie. You know the extra fondness she feels for Abigail is a byproduct of the links being muddled together, Sarah told her. You shouldn't let it get to you. Oh, yeah, sure. You're the one to talk. You read it out your own biddy just because you couldn't handle 10 seconds of Petra being smug about Tally's crush on her. Sarah snorted out a laugh because she could do nothing more. She certainly couldn't deny the charge. She absolutely thrown Yarrow under the bus, because Petra thinking Tally's fondness for her was anything more than odd, unexpected work error was something she simply couldn't abide. You realize telling me to shut up is grounds for a demerit, Yes. You're off duty. Yes, but you are not. Rael stopped just at the threshold of the office and turned around. Sarah, she said, come on, I thought we were buds now. With a hearty chuckle, Sarah put one hand on the top of Rael's head and playfully shoved her out of the way. A second later, she was using that same hand to cover her ear as Tally shrieked at the first sight of Abigail lounging on Sarah's couch by Sarah's fire, sipping Sarah's whiskey. Aggie! Tally, please, Sarah said, inside voice. Tally quickly dropped her voice to a pitchy, dramatic whisper. Aggie! Abigail turned at the sound and offered up a smile that Sarah had to commend her for. It almost looked genuine. Hey, Tal, did you win the game? Obviously. Sarah rolled her eyes. Obviously, you cheated. No, Tally said with a frown. Obviously, is not cheating when it's witches hide and seek. Witches hide and seek, Abigail said, then snorted. Smart. It's what I said. Rael laughed. She crossed to Sarah's bar cart and looked over the options. Do you care if I have a glass, Sarah? Of course not, Sarah said. Help yourself. Your sister certainly has. Abigail at least had the decency to look momentarily chastised. But then she shrugged her shoulders and said, It's a social visit. I just figured the drinks were fair game. My Sarah, Aggie wants me in her lap now, Tally said as she excitedly kicked her heels against Sarah's legs again. Let Tally down, please. Good girl, Sarah said, and bent to set Tally's socked little feet on the floor, though I'm not certain Abigail would agree with you on that first point. Abigail sighed, heavily and resigned. I've accepted my fate for the day. She patted her lap as Tally raced over. Come on, rascal. The giggle that overcame Tally in response was so ridiculously high-pitched and sweet that Sarah felt a genuine buckling in her knees. She shook her head and chuckled as she watched Tally sprint to the sofa. The girl launched herself up and into Abigail's lap with fervor, bouncing and shifting until she was comfortable with her back pressed tightly against Abigail's chest and her feet kicking back and forth where they dangled over the edge of the sofa. Sarah joined them, easing down on the other end of the sofa, adjacent to the armchair Rael now occupied, sipping a glass of Sarah's, or rather, Savannah's, favorite Pinot Noir. Aggie! Tally, Abigail said with just the slightest hint of a lecture lingering in her tone, ready to be unleashed if need be. The honey-brown eye roll Tally answered with was so ridiculously dramatic that Rael promptly choked on her wine, and Sarah couldn't hold back a laugh. But once her annoyance was known, Tally kindly acquiesced to Abigail's unspoken request. Abigail, thank you. Can I tell you about my things now, or are you going to interrupt me again? You got it. Rael wheezed, her eyes watering from the force of her choking. Oh, tell, buddy, you have to warn me when you're going to be an asshole. Seriously. Because it's hilarious. Asshole! Tally sing-songed, and Sarah couldn't even be annoyed. It was too funny and far too cute, and hearing the sheer joy it brought both her sisters made it more than worth it. The sound of their harmonized laughter caused a lovely shift in Sarah's insides, a release of tension, a touch of lightness where she had been feeling so terribly overburdened of late. She so welcomed an afternoon of watching Rael and Abigail bond with and care for their sister in the best way they could under the circumstances. They loved her truly and remained by her side when others might have chosen to move on. She wasn't their responsibility, but she was their family, and neither a bellwether nor a collar would ever turn their back on that. Okay, Tiny Terror Craven, Abigail said as she let Tally play with her hands. Tell me about your things, then. Tally jumped right in the moment she was given permission, so wide-eyed with each of her words that even Abigail seemed excited to hear more. Well, almost. I won so many hides and seeks, Tally told her. So many, Aggie. I mean, Abigail. And my Sarah was so bad at it, too. She giggled madly into her little palm as Sarah rolled her eyes and said, You cheated, little love. You did, Tal, Rael said with a grin. But all's fair in witches hide and seek, right? Sorry, Sarah. Bested by a child, Sarah replied with a sigh. Not my finest moment. She then narrowed her eyes and reached over to poke one of Tally's knees. Next time, I will be ready for you. Nuh-uh, Tally giggled. No way, I'll still win, Sarah. I always win. Oh, is that so? So. She shifted in Abigail's lap, and one of her hands slinked up Abigail's chest to her neck, then around to the underside of her hair. The moment her fingertips dug in, however, Abigail quickly snatched Tally's wrist and pulled it back down. Not the hair, Craven, she warned. Not a chance. Tally chewed her lip and blushed, properly scolded. Yowie, she mumbled as she grabbed Abigail's hands instead and began stroking her fingers again, tracing them one by one. You want to play witches hide and seek? Now that wouldn't be fair, Abigail told her. I'm far too good at witches' games, and I would hate to wound your tiny pride, Tal. Oh no, Sarah said with a chuckle. There is nothing tiny about her pride. She has enough to fill a room or two. Truly, Abigail, her smugness could rival your mother's. Well, Tally isn't known for being smug, so it must be coming from you, Sarah. Rael teased, and Sarah feigned defense with a hand over her chest. Me? No, certainly not, she said, though you make a fair point. Tally is nothing if not humble. I would wager it's Yarrow's infuriating cockiness coming through. Lisha's, perhaps? Certainly she has Lisha's impishness. Tally has quite taken to mischief of late, too. My biddies are not nearly as humble or well-behaved as they would have others believe. With another giggle, Tally pulled her ponytail around her face and stuck it between her nose and upper lip. She scrunched up her lips to hold it there, and in a pinched voice said, Way, look like a mustache. Rael snorted. A mustache, huh? Yes, so look, Aggie! Agabel! They each took turns laughing at and commenting on Tally's ginger mustache, and Tally practically glowed in response. She ate up their attention like it was dinner, and Sarah knew well how much Tally liked her dinners. The girl was a vacuum at the dinner tables most days. With her hair still trapped over her lip and her chin jutted forward to keep it in place, Tally patted Abigail's thigh and commanded her to bounce me Aggie. With a roll of her eyes, Abigail began to bounce her knees, much to Tally's delight. My Sarah, go hide again! No. The hair dropped from Tally's lip as she stared, slack-jawed, at her soulmate. But, Tally, we have already played, Sarah told her. Many, many times, as you said yourself. We took several turns, then you disappeared thanks to my ornery biddies, and now the game is done. Please, Tally whined. Hi for Tally. Sarah sighed, feeling the pull of the urge to do anything and everything her little demon wanted. Still, she held firm with another, No, Tally. Tally poked her bottom lip forward in a pout. Why no, though? I've already told you, my love. But, oh, come on, Sarah, Rael said. Look at her little face. Her little face looks that way for precisely this reason, Rael, Sarah said with a chuckle. A jut of her lip, a flash of a dimple, and the girl can convince anyone to do anything she asks. Such power is dangerous. One must learn to resist. Abigail snorted. Or she's just better at it than you, and you're a sore loser. Abigail Bellwether, Sarah said with a boisterous laugh. How would your mother respond if she heard you speaking to a superior officer in such fashion? Abigail pretended to think even as she carried on with her mindless bouncing. Public scolding, most likely, she grinned. And a private high five. Sarah's laugh deepened, blooming up from her belly and out. Sounds about right. Sarah, Tally sang even though her eyes were fixed on Abigail's hands. It was as if the name simply formed a melody in her throat, as if it was always there, just waiting to be freed, rather than something she actively thought to say. Yes, my love? Tally jolted as if surprised Sarah responded at all. Then she promptly stuck out her bottom lip again and widened her eyes. A maddeningly effective offensive strategy. Please hide for Tally? Oh, just hide for her, Sarah, Rael said, and Sarah groaned. Very well, she said, but you will both see rather quickly why it is entirely pointless. She stood and pointed at Tally. Cover your eyes then, my love. And count to 10. Tally sing-songed as she quickly grabbed Abigail's hands and brought them to her eyes instead of her own. Okay, hurry, Sarah, go hide. 1. Sarah didn't hurry. It wouldn't make a difference. Instead, she stopped and gulped down the remainder of her golden brown liquid from the whiskey glass on her desk. She poured the drink an hour earlier and had barely gotten a sip in when Tally's whining for hide and seek began. It had soon been abandoned as the first of the hunts kicked off. 5. She left the empty glass and calmly made her way towards 2 large oak cabinets. As quietly as possible, Sarah shimmied herself into the slim crack between them and held her breath to not only be silent, but still. Out of the corner of her eye, she could see Rael shaking her head at her and holding up her arms in a "what the" motion. Her mouth moved in a ridiculously exaggerated fashion as she mouthed to Sarah, "You're totally visible." Rael pointed to her own eyes, then at Sarah. "I can see you." Sarah was aware, but gave little more than a half-hearted eye roll just as Tally shouted, 10! Not even a full second later, clean the cabinet, Sarah! What? Rael's head whipped towards Tally as Sarah wriggled herself free again. Tally, you didn't even look! Abigail even leaned forward, surprised. She checked over her own hands, ensuring that her fingers were pressed tightly together with no cracks between. Can you see? Nope, Tally giggled. My Sarah, hide again. 1. Sarah sighed and poured herself another small drink, shot it back in one take. 6. She slipped behind her desk, pushed in her chair, and tidied a few papers, utterly unbothered until Tally reached the number 9. As her little voice sang out the number, Sarah quietly folded herself inside one of the floor-to-ceiling curtains hanging from her desk side window. 10! Then, with Abigail's hand still firmly over her eyes and Sarah hidden in a spot behind the both of them, Tally shouted, "Into Quentin!" What the hell? Abigail said and whirled to look at Sarah as she was slipping free of the curtain. What was that? It was witchcraft, Sarah said with a chuckle. You see, I told you it was pointless. Oh, shit, Rael said as the realization hit. Then she snorted out a laugh. She's using her sight, Abs. Abigail's lips parted in surprise. How is her sight still this good? We're not sure, Sarah said and made her way back over to the sofa. She retook her seat and stretched her legs out in front of her, crossing them at the ankle. Best guess is that it, too, is a result of the bonds melding together. But even the most gifted knowers on record didn't have sight this clear before puberty. Not even the ones with precognitive abilities. Sarah gave a slow nod. It is astounding, she quietly agreed. Isadora suspects she may be tapping into my and the Biddies' collective power, most likely without realizing or trying. It would amplify her own abilities, and since she seems to have retained much, if not all, of her knowledge and training, she is able to use work with ease and without thought, including that which should far exceed the limits of a 5-year-old body and vocal range. Yeah, no shit, Rael said. I thought she was going to level the infirmary with all of us inside that very first day. Which, by the way, she grinned at Sarah, I'm calling that whole ordeal the Great Pudding War, the battle of lemon versus vanilla. So if you want, you can commission a fancy portrait for it to go with all of your other ones. I can totally go get you some lemon cups to pose with. Sarah chuckled and kicked her foot out to bump Rael's leg. She sighed, tired and surprisingly comfortable, as Rael laughed at her own humor and kicked her back. It had yet to cease astounding her how at ease she had grown with Tally's two sisters. A natural, though hard-fought progression since the start of her relationship with Tally, but astounding nonetheless. Sarah rarely felt such ease with others, not because she was incapable, but because she was simply not of this time. She always felt a bit out of place, even in places that had always been home, even with people she cared for or loved. She could go along, act out the motions as any other would, laugh at the right places, tease with the best of them, and of course, she could feel emotions much more than skin deep. But so long after her natural life should have ended, everything tended toward strange sort of disconnect, as if experiencing life through a filter, thin and translucent but ever present, always reminding her she was a part. Until, of course, Tally. What do you think Kalita knows about all this? Rael asked, drawing Sarah from her thoughts and back to the present. Do you think she'll have any information about the new bond you told us about? The purple one? Sarah pursed her lips, thinking on it. I couldn't say, she replied. Honestly, I wouldn't even know where to begin. Her line is an ancient one, far older than even my own, and while I know rather little about how the Tarim function, I would imagine many of their traditions fall in line with those of other roaming covens and clans. Elder knowledge and clan history would be preserved and passed from conduit to conduit throughout the years, someone selected by their own to be imbued with such work and knowledge. Which is why Kalita is so honestly creepy is the only word that comes to mind, and the girl has only ever been nice to me, Rael said, and even Abigail chuckled. She's got what, millennia of her people's history stuffed inside her head? Something like that, Sarah said, a small smile pulling at one corner of her mouth. But what is stored within that knowledge is anyone's guess. Songs long extinct? Work unpracticed for centuries? Evolution and death, growth and disease? All the triumphs and troubles of her people. Rare information about even rarer bonds? Abigail posed, and Sarah sighed. One can only hope, Abigail, she said, and even to her own ears, her voice sounded raw and emotional. She hated it, but made no attempt to mask it. Not with these two. Not after everything. And if hope is enough to foster results or change, then perhaps we will have our Tally back sooner than later, for I have it in spades. Abigail's answering expression tugged at Sarah's chest, the dip of her lips, the furrowing of her brow, the sudden wetness in her eyes. But the girl quickly cleared her throat and turned her head just as, My Sarah? Sarah's gaze drew down to Abigail's lap, to the small girl who had been entertaining herself with Abigail's fingernails and jacket sleeve. Now, her big brown eyes were fixed on Sarah, wide and sad. What is it, my love? Sarah asked, unable to help the melting of her voice. She had always been softer with Tally. For Tally. She found she was even more so now, when Tally was so small and seemed, despite her mischief and her joy and her strange new developments, still so very vulnerable. Why so sad? Tally asked, and her voice was a whisper, a broken little whimper. Her big eyes watered as she looked so earnestly at Sarah, and Sarah knew Tally must be channeling her emotions through the bond without realizing it. As light as Sarah felt in this moment, the ever-present squeeze of her true Tally's absence had worn her thin and tired. She wondered if that, in and of itself, was an effect of the bond, the sheer weight of the loss. It certainly wasn't out of the question. Their connection had intensified every other aspect of their life together, and even of their individual lives, their emotions and senses and work. Ultimately, though, Sarah knew she had simply grown so very used to having someone, her someone. After such a terribly long time, her lonely, dim soul had been ignited into new light, new fire. It had been addicting, comforting. It had been the best feeling Sarah had ever known. Something so sacred and natural, something weightless and joyful and profound. And for the first time in her centuries-long life, Sarah had known what it meant to belong to someone. That feeling of completeness, of being wholly known and wholly understood, wholly safe, every part of her. This change had rocked that feeling, shaken it, and while it wasn't a loss entirely, it, in so many ways, still felt like one. And all Sarah wanted to do was cling to Tally, even if she could only have her like this, keep her close, keep her safe, keep her hers. Sarah sighed and slowly shook her head. I am fine, she promised, and she was. She missed her, missed the way they were, but she had meant what she said before. She was devastated with how things had developed, despite how darling her small girl was. But she had hope. She was brimming with it, her blood so rich with it that she could inspire and sate the world if bled. She had always been that way. It's why she was still going, still beating, still fighting. She'd never stopped hoping, and she never would. Not for which kind, and certainly not for Tally. Tally sniffled and used Abigail's sleeve to wipe fat tears from her cheeks, much to Abigail's horror. Want to hold Tally? The clenching in Sarah's chest could have killed her. Instead, it cracked her voice as she said, Always. With lightning speed, Tally scrambled from Abigail's lap to Sarah's. Her small feet smashed over Sarah's thighs and stomach until she nearly toppled herself before finally settling onto Sarah's chest. She wringed her arms around Sarah's neck, up and under her hair, and wriggled and tunneled her legs behind Sarah's back until she was wrapped around the woman like a ginger koala bear. Sarah looped her arms around her and rubbed soothing circles into Tally's back. A tiny hint of a smile pulled at her lips as she felt Tally's lips press little kisses to her neck and shoulder. Sweet little kisses, like a balm to a boo-boo. It was very nearly Sarah's further undoing. Instead, she simply sighed again and squeezed Tally tighter, sent a silent prayer of thanks to the goddess for the gift that was this darling girl, this beautiful soul in any form, at any age. She was grateful. You good? Rael asked softly, drawing Sarah's gaze to her. She nodded, her chin rubbing against Tally's hair. I am fine, she promised again. Thank you. You know what's funny? Rael said, and her sad, commiserating expression slowly morphed into a grin. What is that? Tally is exactly like this, whether you're sad or not, Rael said, and Sarah felt a kernel of laughter pop in her belly. A moment later, it jumped from her lips. Seriously, she got so excited after our first performance in harmonics that she straight up straddled Abigail in a bear hug for like 10 minutes doing that, happy cry laugh thing she does. We call it craffing, Abigail interjected, and Sarah's belly jumped again with laughter. She felt Tally squeeze her tight, and then a little giggle whispered into her neck, and Sarah laughed even harder. And Sarah, Rael kept on, getting more and more tickled as she recalled. I swear to the goddess, you should have seen Abigail's face. Was hilarious. Okay, okay, Abigail said, now joining in Rael's laughter. In my defense, I barely knew the girl at this point. She looked poignantly at Sarah. And you know I wasn't raised to be affectionate. Oh, no, not a bellwether, Sarah said with a chuckle. I once overheard your grandmother telling Petra, and mind you, your mother was young at the time, certainly under the age of 10, that hugs were like breath mints. It was rude to simply pass them out, as it implied others were in need of them. I can't recall her exact words. But it was something to the effect of, if I am in need of a breath mint, Petty, I will ask for one. Abigail finished for her, taking on the superior air of her grandmother's severe voice. She and Sarah locked gazes immediately after, and then all at once they burst into laughter. Rael echoed the sound, and then shortly after, Sarah heard Tally's little giggles thumping against her neck and ear again. I've heard her say it so many times at this point. I'm positive my mother is triggered every time she sees a peppermint. That's so sad, though, Rael said, even as she cackled. I feel bad for laughing. Abigail shrugged. It's Minerva. You get used to her. No, no, you don't, Sarah said, and Abigail snorted. Does she hug you? Rael asked. Sometimes, Abigail said. I can remember at least 5 or 6 times. In your whole life? Rael gaped, astonished. Seriously? I have to, physically pry my dad off me sometimes. The man hugs me every chance he gets. Well, welcome to high Atlantic childhood. Abigail chuckled and Sarah nodded. It wasn't always that way, she said. But wealth and prominence often breed superiority and disconnect. It was unfortunately no different for witches. Did your parents hug you? Rael asked, and Sarah nodded again. My mother certainly. She was quite affectionate. But not your dad? Sarah tilted her head, thinking. On occasion, she said as she restarted her slow, soothing circles over Tally's back. He wasn't opposed to it, but it was a different time then. Men were more removed from the emotional aspects of the family. In some ways, that carries on today, but it was considerably more pronounced then and certainly expected. He welcomed hugs from my sister and me any time we asked or offered, but he rarely initiated. She smiled. He did at times attack us with his beard, however. It was quite scruffy, and he would go right for our necks, nuzzling us relentlessly. And my sister, God has help her, was horribly ticklish. She loathed it. Abigail snorted. Tally is that way too. So ticklish. Sarah nodded. Oh, I know. She passed out in Ray's bunk at 7 o'clock one night after Anacostia worked us to the bone on the obstacle course, and Rail barely tickled her armpit. Like, barely, Rail said. And I was just trying to get her to roll over so I wasn't falling off my own freaking bed. And next thing we know, Tally's screeching awake, flapping her arms like a pissed off penguin, and smacks me right in the face. Abigail cackles. Right in her face! She clutches her stomach and wheezes. Oh, goddess, she had a split lip and everything. And if I know Tally, Sarah said, she apologized profusely when she realized what she'd done. Oh, yeah, she full on cried. Rael snickered. I ended up having to console her over my split lip. Sarah grinned and shook her head, turned to press a small kiss into Tally's hair. She felt Tally's little fingers clenched in her shirt, and then a quiet little snore vibrated against Sarah's neck. A second later, the snore erupted into something hideously oversized and cacophonous, and Sarah couldn't hold her laugh. Uh-oh, Sarah chuckled. Someone has fallen asleep. Holy shit, Rael said, eyes wide. She sounds like an angry bear. Sarah laughed even harder. Yes, another side effect of the bond issue, she said. Apparently, one of my biddies is quite the snorer. That is just. Abigail's eyes twitched. That's a lot. It is, Sarah admitted and softly sang the seed to quiet Tally's noise. I think I will go and lay her down for a while. These last few days, with everything that's happened, I'm surprised she's had as much energy as she has. Her poor body has been through so much. She should rest. But thank you both for coming by. I know it made Tally happy. She carefully stood as Rael and Abigail popped to their feet. Tally tightened around her but didn't wake. She looped her arms under Tally's thighs and held her tightly, tucking her chin over her girl's shoulder. It did me as well. Good, Rael said, giving Sarah a soft smile. We'll see you both tomorrow. Yeah? I'm sure. Sarah agreed with a nod and watched as the two filed towards the door, Abigail stopping to briefly rest a hand on Sarah's arm. She squeezed Sarah's elbow and met her eyes, a bolstering look that Sarah felt like a support beneath her bones, helping to raise her, keep her afloat. She nodded, grateful, and then once again, she and Tally were alone. Sarah stood in her empty, quiet office holding Tally, rocking her gently from side to side. She hummed a song she only ever heard in her memories anymore, something as old as she was, and buried her nose in Tally's hair. It smelled like oat and vanilla from her shampoo, a soothing scent that made Sarah feel as lazy as Tally apparently did. Slowly, she made her way back to their bedroom and bent to lay Tally on their bed. The girl instantly curled into her pillow as Sarah covered her up and tucked her in. Sarah then dropped onto her knees at the bedside and lay her cheek on the pillow as well, the tip of her nose just barely brushing Tally's. She lay her palm over the side of Tally's head, gently cupping her, and whispered, "A blessing on you, Tally." She then closed her eyes and sighed, prayed harder than she had in a terribly long time. "A blessing for you, please." Her eyes stung. "Please." 2 days later, Sarah was on her knees again, this time in the dirt. Tally was seated in front of her, covered in filth and wearing a dimpled grin, and Sarah was guiding her hands as they planted another sapling together in Fort Salem's fertile soil. Carefully, they secured the base, Sarah holding it in place while Tally patted the dirt to compact it. "This is our tree, my Sarah," Tally proudly declared once they were finished. The same declaration she'd made about the last 5 trees they planted. "Yes, it is," Sarah said, "just as all those that came before, and undoubtedly those that will follow." "Yeah, and when it gets big and strong," Tally said as she crawled around and wriggled her tiny butt up into Sarah's thigh, "we can put a swing on." "Oh?" Sarah chuckled, knowing the tree would be plenty big and strong in time thanks to the fertility of the grounds, enhanced by Sarah's own vast magic. "Is that what you want? A tree swing?" "Yeah." "And who will be pushing home, Sarah asked, and Tally scrunched her face up in thought. Um, me," she finally said with a nod. "And then you, my Sarah." Sarah used the sleeve of her shirt to wipe dirt and sweat from Tally's cheeks and forehead. "You're going to push me, and then I'm going to push you?" Tally's giggle was bright and infectious. "No, silly," she said. "I push the baby, then you push the baby." "The baby?" Sarah's brow furrowed, and suddenly there were voices spilling into her head. The biddies, all spaced out and dotted around the lawn, planting their own flowers and trees, erupted in chatter. Ember, who was positioned closest to them and had heard Tally directly, was the loudest. She'd quickly clued in the others, and now Sarah's mind was riddled with gasps and guesses. "The baby? Oh, goddess, the baby? Who's having a baby? First, she talks about marriage, and now we're having a baby?" Sarah couldn't deny the wild fluttering in her chest and gut. Surely not. Still, she looked Tally's sweet face over and asked, "Whose baby are we pushing, my love?" Tally gave another genuine giggle, and Sarah half expected to be called silly again. But Tally's dimpled cheeks only blushed a pretty pink as she laughed and groaned out a long, "Sarah!" "Oh, goddess!" Yarrow's voice came through. "I don't think I can handle an actual baby. With those dimples? No way." "Sarah?" Sarah jolted, caught off guard, quickly regained herself. She turned to find an officer waiting just behind, standing at parade rest. Sarah blinked up at the young woman. It was jarring to be called by her name by someone whose own name she couldn't at all recall. Myers? Mason? Something with an M, maybe? And Sarah was utterly in the dark as to the soldier's first name. The girl, at least, looked somewhat uncomfortable using the name, likely told to do so since Sarah was off duty and had herself been reminding everyone of as much as often as anyone grew within range of hearing. And that made Sarah feel a bit better. At least she wasn't the only one who found it odd. "Yes, General Bellwether sent me," the soldier said. "Your guest has arrived. She said you would know where to go." "We got a guest!" Tally shouted, clearly excited despite knowing nothing about what was going on. "I love guests! Let's go, Sarah!" Sarah chuckled and tilted her head to acknowledge the soldier. "Thank you, daughter." The young woman smiled and turned, walking off in perfect form, and Sarah nodded her approval as she watched. She then turned back to Tally and bopped her nose, feeling a renewed burst of flame in her chest. Pure, burning hope. Kalida had finally arrived. Yes, she said to her wee girl as she stood, pulling Tally up with her. She patted dirt off her own clothes, then Tally's. Let's go.
Please find the fanfiction you just listened to on Archive of Our Own and leave the author some love. Without them, this wouldn't be possible, and we want to thank them from the bottoms of our hearts for creating these amazing stories and keeping the show alive.